This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. In yesterday's video, I was able to just barely scratch the surface on this big web of deceit and lies being told by Harry and Meghan and their agenda that they're pushing here. I did that video so everybody could see how Harry and Meghan are connected to the Center for Countering Digital Hate, who is very much a part of this censorship industrial complex. This is the group responsible for the defamatory report called the Disinformation Dozen that was seen around the world. These 12 were globally demonized. They were stripped of their online communities, and during that time, as many can recall, all we had were online communities. These far-left radical Nazis who advocate for censorship bang on constantly about mental health, but they don't think about the mental health of the people that they are deplatforming and demonetizing, are they? No. And as we saw yesterday in those whistleblower documents, their go-to strategy is talking about affecting the monetization. You know, the excuse or the framing around why these voices needed to be suppressed was because they were in it for profit. Does anybody really believe that American royalty, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., needed to spread misinformation for profit? The other thing is that I had no idea who these other 11 people were until this Disinformation Dozen report popped up. So I find it very hard to believe that these 12 people were responsible for 2/3 of the misinformation being spread online about COVID and the vaccine. There were a lot of voices at that time talking about the jab and getting deplatformed. Some had bigger platforms and voices than these 12. And just like Christopher Bouzy, the selection criteria was quite vague. They chose these 12 based off of, according to them, on the number of followers they had, the high volumes of anti-vaccine content, so probably looked at a few posts that got maybe more eyeballs than the government would like, and then not liking how quickly these accounts were growing. This was the same exact playbook that Harry and Meghan had Christopher Bouzy play on us. When you read the similarities between what happened to the Disinformation Dozen and compare that to Megxit, and knowing that Harry is connected to this group, you only have to put 2 and 2 together to realize that we too also were affected by this similar information warfare tactic to silence and shut down our voices, specifically with Yankee Wally, because she was growing the fastest out of all of us. And it's not because she was pushing hateful content, she was pushing content that people were interested in listening to. She had a great way of telling stories as well as posing the questions that so many of us had, just like what was going on during COVID and the hesitancy as well as the injuries that were happening. Like, you couldn't talk about those things. You know, it was the same thing with this damn moon bump and this scam that is being run on the public about those 2 children in the line of succession. And the thing that's like the most infuriating about this is that the public didn't ask for the media to be saturated with Meghan every single day, contradicting herself or, doing things to provoke the public to get the reaction that they need in order to make the claim or the justification as to why we need this regulation that ends up eroding and weakening the First Amendment. All being driven out of the UK with funding from the United States coming from the deep state blob. And when I talk about the deep state blob, I'm talking about the CIA and the Pentagon, as well as other nefarious characters that are running around in this country who is supporting this globalist agenda from both right and left sides, otherwise known as the Uniparty. By focusing on the origins of this parents' network, I ended up stumbling upon this little gem yesterday, tucked away in the corners of the internet. Digging in a public document repository called Document Cloud is the House Committee's interview with Imran Ahmed that took place in June of 2024. Now, if you can for me, I want everybody to take a moment and try to remember what it was like back in June of 2024. This was before Keir Starmer was elected on July 4th. This was before the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in Butler. This was before Kamala Harris announced that she was running for president. But most importantly, these whistleblower documents that were leaked by someone from the CCDH didn't drop until October of 2024. And the reason why I am telling you all of this to keep in the back of your head is because we're going to look at some of the responses in this interview that I'm quite surprised that nobody is questioning whether or not this guy perjured himself. I think he did. So to set the stage, it's on record where it says you should also understand that although this interview is not under oath, that by law you are required to answer questions from Congress truthfully. Do you understand that? Mr. Ahmed says yes. It also says this also applies to questions posed by congressional staff in an interview. Do you understand this? Mr. Ahmed says, of course. They go on to say witnesses that knowingly provide false testimony could be subject to criminal prosecution for perjury or for making false statements under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. Do you understand this? Mr. Ahmed says, yes. And finally, is there any reason you are unable to provide truthful answers to today's questions? Mr. Ahmed says no. So right here is confirmation that Imran Ahmed is of sound mind and body with no impairments or disability to be revisited at a later date should this come into question, which it now is coming into question. This is going to be a little bit out of order. We'll get into Imran Ahmed's origins and background after we cover how this disinformation dozen report got into the hands of the Biden administration. The question asked here is, when did CCDH first operate in the United States? And Ahmed responds, I can't remember our incorporation date. It was 2020, end of 2020, that we incorporated, which is correct. It was in December of 2020. Question, and why did you start operating in the United States? Imran replies, our analysis was that if you were going to truly provide checks and balances on social media companies, you need to go to the jurisdiction that has most direct influence on them, and that is the United States. Question, when you started operations in the United States, what did that look like? Did you open an office here? Ahmed says, we did. We opened a physical office. I mean, keep in mind, this is during the pandemic. So we opened a physical office, we opened a company, and we brought on lawyers, and we took our 501c3 status. Question, prior to that, had anyone from CCDH been interacting with members of the U.S. government? He replies, yes, yeah. We'd taken meetings with people in the U.S. government before that. Now, keep in mind, Trump was in office. Question, do you know from where within the U.S. government? Ahmed replies, in the Trump White House with the TUI coordinator, so the terrorist use of the Internet coordinator at the NSC, with the Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, with the special envoy for countering anti-Semitism. I can't recall the exact title. I know it's long, who I think was Elan Carr at the time, and with other officials at the state, I believe. Possibly within state, for sure. There may be other officials, but I can't recall precisely. Question. And who from CCDH was handling these interactions with the U.S. government? Ahmed replies, those were mainly me. Actually, back then, we were small. Okay, so back then in 2020, he was dealing with the Trump administration when the pandemic broke out. Okay, so now my question is, how do you not remember your initial startup days when you were the only one running the show? How do you not know who you were dealing with? The question asked next was, were you joined by anyone from CCDH? And Ahmed replies, I can't recall. I really can't recall. This is 4 years ago. Well, my thought is you just got done saying that it was mainly you who interacted with the U.S. government because you were really small. How do you not know if anybody joined you or not? It's not like he was dealing with like 200 employees or anything like that. Question. Do these tend to be in-person meetings? Or Ahmed replies, it was COVID, not. So no. Question, how did you first get connected to individuals within the State Department? His response, I believe we wrote to them. Although I can't I mean, there may have been referrals, or they may have reached out to us. I think Mr. Carr reached out to us, for example. But there may have been referrals between governments as well, because the work we were doing on anti-Semitism is a bipartisan concern in both the UK and US, for example, and a significant concern of our foreign policy apparatus in both countries. Okay, so now the question that I have is, who is Imran talking about when he says we reached out to them? Who's we? Literally 2 seconds ago, Imran Ahmed just got done saying that it was mainly him handling the interactions with the US government because they were so small back then. But getting back to this, the other question I have here is, if there were referrals coming in from the UK government, who from the UK government was working with you to facilitate introductions into our government? And I call bullshit on the anti-Semitism advocacy that this guy was pushing here, because back in 2021, when he sat in front of Parliament, it was a completely different story.
So on the question of the disinformation dozen, we've been looking at anti-vax misinformation for over a year now. Our first report on it was the anti-vax industry. Our first private report on it was to Her Majesty's government and to the US government.
Private report given to the US government back in May of 2020. You mean to tell me you don't remember how you started, especially when a year later you're sitting in front of Parliament and retelling the story of how you got started? I'm pretty sure if we look around, we will find other examples of this same story being retold. Now, Imran Ahmed's like, I really can't remember. It was 4 years ago. Well, not really. Here he is sitting in front of Parliament a year later, towards the end of 2021, and we're supposed to believe that he couldn't remember his early days and his fresh beginnings, that he literally recounted 2 years prior? Come on. And what I find disgusting is how this guy is using anti-Semitism now as his shield, just like how Prince Harry did recently. And I suspect the reason why he threw in anti-Semitism work and focus is because literally 8 months prior was October 7th attacks, and anti-Semitism was on the top of everybody's mind. But if we go back in time and listen to what this race-baiting jackal had to say, you'll recognize that it had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. This was about xenophobia and all of these illegal migrants coming in.
Over a year now. Our first report on it was the anti-vax industry. Our first private report on it was to Her Majesty's government and to the US government in around May last year. We said, COVID's coming, there's going to be a rise in xenophobia because there's a correlation between disgust sensitivity, which is going to be induced during a pandemic, and xenophobia. There's psychological reasons for it, there's neurological reasons for it. They're both co-located in the insular cortex of the brain. That's what Robert Sapolsky, the neuroendocrinologist, told me. That there are complex reasons as to why we're going to see this rise. And the one group that genuinely knows how to weaponize misinformation about health, that has built scale, that has an understanding of the communications, the technology, has also built sustainable economies based on misinformation, is the anti-vax industry.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it had anything to do with anti-Semitism. Continuing on, question. When CCDH first starts operations in the United States, how many employees did you have working full-time in the United States? Imran Ahmed replies, gosh, I think just me. Like, why the uncertainty there? It's either you know or you don't. You're supposed to be the CEO. One would think you would have an understanding of your little bagel shop that you're just starting up here in the United States with very few people. Question. In the lead up to the 2020 election, was anyone from CCDH in contact with either of the two presidential campaigns? Imran Ahmed says the campaigns as opposed to the White House, or question, yes. I don't believe so, no. But let's not forget, Harry and Meghan were. Question, was CCDH in contact with the Biden-Harris transition team? He says, I personally was not. I can't speak to board members in their private lives, and so I'm not sure as to whether or not any of them were, but I certainly was not. It's likely that it's this dude who hooked it all up from the beginning. His name is Simon Clark and sits on the board of CCDH. Not only was he a fellow at Atlantic Council, but also for the Center for American Progress. We can only speculate. Okay, so now let's get into the questions about the Disinformation Dozen. Question: who from CCDH took the primary lead in researching and drafting the Disinformation Dozen report? Ahmed responds, always the research. So once we had a research director, the research director is responsible for all research reports. Question: who was the research director at the time? Ahmed answers, Callum Hood. He still is. Now pay close attention to this next question. When did the research first begin for the Disinformation Dozen report? So Imran answers, I can't recall. And to be specific, you could look at the methodologies clearly laid out in the report. The interviewer replies, yeah, but prior to beginning the sample size and looking at the posts, how far in advance had someone from CCDH decide that this was objective research that was going to be undertaken? Going back to the initial question, when did all of this start? Give me the timelines. Well, Imran Ahmed didn't like that, and he says, that's not the way that research is done at CCDH. So there's no decision taken. This is the next piece of research. We always have dozens of potential things that we might research that are being considered at any one time, things that it's very hard to then sift through those and work out what makes it. What kind of nonsense is this? It pretty much sounds like they just threw a whole bunch of names into a hat and pulled out 12 random people. Or what I think happened here is that maybe someone came across a post that was dissenting in views around vaccines and sent it to CCDH and said, look, we got to stop this from snowballing. And my guess is that someone from the team, Callum Hood, probably looked up the account, and then all of a sudden, whatever platform they were on, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, started to recommend other like-minded people. And that's how this list came to be. That's what I would guess, because when you look at the explanation as to how they chose these 12 people, it doesn't wash. There's no metrics that they're sharing around how long this observation was, as well as looking at past behavior. If there were any indication of doing the same exact thing and profiting with other issues or emergencies per se. This obviously was a political hit against Robert F. Kennedy Jr., given the nature of the constant interest in the elections. We talked about this yesterday, that top of mind, the beginning of 2024 for Imran Ahmed was how to intervene in the elections that year. And sadly, what I think is that the other 11 were just collateral damage, because what this report intended to do was teach everybody a lesson and was being used as the foundation to drive this legislation in the UK for the Online Safety Act. What a lot of people missed here when Imran Ahmed went before Parliament in September of 2021, the chair was Damian Collins. Damian Collins was a board member of CCDH, stepped down when he became MP. After he stopped being MP, went back to be a part of the CCDH board, which he currently now serves. So here you have Damian Collins, who's like the head of the sports digital media group that was driving this online safety bill to get it passed. He was at the head of it. So to bring Imran Ahmed into the mix after he was sitting on the board of CCDH, you don't see that there's a level of coordination happening here right before our eyes? This was all orchestrated. You know who this guy works for now? That intelligence consulting firm called Orbis. Orbis, the one founded by Christopher Steele, the guy that did the Steele dossier that was the foundation for the Russia hoax. Russia, which then became the foundation for this censorship complex to protect our democracy and elections. And the thing that gets me is Imran Ahmed explains their focus had been on the U.S. election. So the question is why? What does that have to do with legislation getting passed through in the UK?
In that time, I have found one central truth. Social media companies are incapable of regulating themselves. Whenever they are given the chance, they put profit before people. In the past year, they faced 3 key tests, and they failed all 3. They failed to take action on racists abusing black and minority sportspeople, which is why we'll have evidence given later from Rio Ferdinand, among others. They failed to take action on US election misinformation, which led to the deadly assault on the US Capitol just down the road from where I live in Washington, D.C. And finally, they're still failing to act on anti-vaccine lies.
These arrogant assholes should scare everybody, because essentially what he's saying is that because the social media companies are not regulating the content to the degree that they need to see it, right, to favor the leftist views, to drive this agenda, then somebody else has to do it, because you can't give the end user the freedom to think for themselves and to decide what is true and what's not. And those three issues that Imran Ahmed chose to focus on really were hot buttons here in the United States. So when you're bringing up the US election, what does that have to do with the UK? Absolutely nothing. And then you're going to pick 12 Americans as your sample to make the case that spreading misinformation about COVID kills people? But anyway, I digress. Imran Ahmed continues his snarky reply by saying, I can't tell you right now if there's a formula for what makes it and what doesn't. But keep in mind, we're an advocacy organization. We seek to change things. And so we're not researching for the sake of researching. There's a point to the research as well. Oh, you mean an agenda to the research? Because this sure smells like an agenda. They couldn't make this any more obvious. This was an assault on our American freedom. And in my opinion, this was to prove to the deep state, the globalists, all of them, that the First Amendment could be circumvented. And as I said from day one, you lose free speech, you lose everything else. And that's exactly what's going on in the UK. And they want to do the same thing here in America, but the First Amendment is in the way. You can't have compliance if there are people speaking out and dissenting. Continuing on, question, and what role do you play in terms of deciding what research ultimately is significant enough and in line with CCDH's views to begin drafting a report? Imran Ahmed replies, I play a very significant role in that. Question, are you the final decision maker? He replies, of course, I'm the chief executive officer. So, here he is boasting that he is the most important man in the room, but at the same time couldn't remember 3 years ago on how his business started. Please, give me a break. Question, do you recall at what point you decided to have CCDH begin drafting the Disinformation Dozen report? Imran Ahmed replies, when I saw the data. Question, do you know who Andy Slavitt is? He responds, no. Okay, so right there, they've moved on to the next topic. There was no further questioning around, well, okay, when did you see that data? How long was it before you received this data? And how long did you study the data? And how did you come to your conclusion that these were going to be the 12 people that you were going to go after, slander, and make an example out of? There was no more follow-up there. It moves on to, asking who these people were that were part of the U.S. government. Imran Ahmed goes on to say, I haven't got a great memory for names, but it's not someone that's top of mind. No. He's not someone I can recall. Well, all of a sudden it's so convenient that you just can't remember anything, right? That seems to be the playbook for these leftists. Whenever you don't want to answer, admit to anything, you just don't remember. Remember how that turned out for Meghan Markle when she forgot that she collaborated with Omid Scobie? Yeah. Okay. Question. Did you have any interactions with the White House regarding the Disinformation Dozen report? Ahmed says, did I personally? Question, yes. No. Did anyone from CCDH? Ahmed says, not to my knowledge, beyond the correspondence that you'll have seen. Question, to your understanding, how did the White House become aware of the Disinformation Dozen report? Ahmed replies, it remains, to this day, a mystery to me. Question, in the spring of 2021, who from the CCDH had primary responsibility for interacting with the U.S. government? Ahmed says, it would have been me. But in the spring of 2021, we were a very small organization, far fewer than a dozen staff. So in the same sentence, he's like, I can't remember. I can't recall precisely how many. And we also knew that our primary means of communicating to stakeholders was actually directly on social media and then through press coverage of our work. So here we have some conflicting information because at the beginning of this, he already said that, he wasn't sure how they got involved with the government, maybe somebody from the board, but now saying that it would have been him who would have been directly involved with the government. So which is it, Imran? It's a little too convenient to claim that you have a bad memory and you can't remember names or you just don't remember. It's not like this was the Epstein files and 30 years ago. I can understand if you don't remember things, but this was not too long ago. And you, as the CEO, the one who makes all the decisions, should know this information. Otherwise, you're a shit CEO. So in 2024, this guy says he has no idea how this report got into the hands of the US government. And he goes into detail in this interview about how all of these reports are on the website. And it's possible someone from the government went to the website on their own and pulled the report, essentially saying that we had nothing to do with it. If the government got their hands on it, it's not because of us. It's a mystery to him. I'd like to remind you that at the beginning of this interview, he was told that even though it wasn't under oath, that by law, he was required to answer questions from Congress truthfully. And this was not truthful.
The misinformation about the COVID-19 vaccine spread online can be linked to just 12 social media accounts. That is a finding of a study done by the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Those 12 have been dubbed the Disinformation Dozen. And to talk about this, we have the CEO of that center with us here this evening, Imran Ahmed. Thanks so much for your time and sharing more information about this study. And that's where we'll start. What did the study look at, and how was this conclusion reached that all of the misinformation we've seen could be linked to those 12 accounts?
Well, good evening. First of all, the phenomenon of anti-vaxxers and the fact that a small number of individuals are creating the majority of the misinformation that we see, that's been known for some time.
But it was only Americans who they looked at. Nobody else could possibly be spreading mis and disinformation, right? Only Americans.
We've known that anti-vaxxers have become a professional industry who produce misinformation that's incredibly compelling and that is designed to be shared as well. And what we did is we looked at the number of shares of misinformation on social media platforms. We found that 65% of the shares were of material produced by just 12 individuals. So 12 individuals are producing 65% of the most shared information out there. When we put that research together and sent it to both Congress and the social media companies, well, you can imagine it caused quite a stir.
Wait, what was that again?
When we put that research together and sent it to both Congress and the social media.
And for anybody that says that I edited this clip, you can go ahead and look at this video yourself. It's still up there on YouTube. And in the event that that video gets pulled down mysteriously, don't worry, I archived it because there is a lawsuit in process right now where this is going to come in handy.
When we put that research together and sent it to both Congress and the social media.
This is a guy who is on record with the Judiciary Committee saying he has no idea how this report got into the hands of the Biden administration. And here he is admitting that they themselves gave it to Congress directly. I'm not a lawyer, but this appears to be perjury. And this is not the only instance where there's a contradiction in things that he's said in the past that don't align with what he's trying to sell today in order to stay in this country and avoid being sued for defamation, which I don't think is going to fly because it's these little details that are going to nail him and subsequently Harry as well. So after that, Imran Ahmed digs a hole even deeper. Question: at what point in 2021 did you become aware that staff within the White House were familiar with the Disinformation Dozen report? Ahmed answers, when President Biden called Facebook killers, and then there was a subsequent clarification, I think, by the press secretary, the White House. So what do you call that person who speaks for the president? Playing dumb now? Yeah, the press secretary, Jen Psaki. Yeah. And in fact, it may have been his comments. He said, there's these people, these 12 people who produce, and we knew that was our report. Yeah. So that was mid-July of 2021? Yeah. The report had come out in March of 2021. Sure. In that interim period, had anyone from the White House reached out to CCDH for a briefing? Ahmed says, I don't recall myself, but we have provided you with all of our emails. Are you sure about that, Imran? It came as an absolute surprise to us, but there had been a renewed press interest in the report, and so after it launched, there was a lull. We got a lot of coverage when it launched. There was a lull, and then there was a sudden burst again. So here Imran Ahmed is playing stupid, like he didn't give the report directly to Congress, as he said back in 2021. Let's listen to that again.
When we put that research together and sent it to both Congress and the social media companies, well, you can imagine it caused quite a stir.
I can't wait to hear the excuse of, oh, I forgot, or I misremembered.
Is it just anti-vaccination that we're talking about, though, or is it misinformation and hate in general that's being spread across digital platforms?
Well, it's always been known that a small number of individuals create the bulk of the biomass of misinformation and hate. So we've seen this across identity-based hate, misogyny, anti-vax, climate change denial. Small numbers of individuals can really disproportionately affect the debate and can shape what people see. Because, look, it comes down to this. Social media platforms are designed to reward only one thing: engagement. Engagement, whether negative or positive. The more effectively crafted the controversy around a post, the more that you get seen, essentially. And these folks have just mastered that. Now, these are not individuals. They actually have behind them companies, 501c3s, charities, and all sorts of different institutions which they control, which either produce the material or are used as fronts to send that material out.
And that is categorically false. Did they ever contact anybody from the Disinformation Doesn't report to have a conversation and ask questions around why they are spreading certain content on there before they went off to print this defamatory report that yet till this day is still up on that website? No, they didn't. And what they did here was deliberate. So they keep using the word misinformation, but you notice that they call this the Disinformation Dozen. There was an intention here with using disinformation. Why didn't they use misinformation? It was deliberate to paint these people as purposely putting out this content, knowing that they are harming others by doing it, just to make money. It's exactly what Harry and Meghan have been putting out this whole entire time. It's not misinformation. Misinformation is information out there that you genuinely believe is real and truthful, and the intention is not to deceive. You're just not correct. In this case, they made a choice to call these 12 the Disinformation Dozen. This was a deliberate choice, and this guy is not going to be able to get out of this one by saying, oh, we chose it because it sounded better for marketing purposes to catch people's attention. That's not going to fly either, because this guy is fully aware of the definitions of misinformation and disinformation because he clarified his expertise in this interview. Once again, on record with the House Committee. Once again, on record with the Judiciary Committee, they ask him the question, are you familiar with the terms misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation? Ahmed replies, I've heard the latter term recently. I know the first two terms, obviously. I'm the CEO of CCDH. Question, all right, to your understanding, what is the difference among those three terms? Ahmed says, misinformation is being wrong. Disinformation incorporates mens rea. And for those that don't know what mens rea is, it's Latin. The guy obviously does believe he is the smartest one in the room, and that means guilty mind. So it's lying. And malinformation is, I'm not quite sure. Question, has CCDH or in any of your boards ever used malinformation? Ahmed says, I don't believe we ever have. However, you can. Again, all of our reports are up on our website. Question: where have you heard the term malinformation used? Ahmed says, I can't recall recently. Someone mentioned it to me. I can't recall who it was. I laughed at it. Question: why was that? Ahmed says, there's a proliferation of terms that could be explained much more simply using plain English. Lying. Being wrong. Okay, if we go by this logic, because Imran Ahmed thinks everybody's too stupid to get it, then why didn't they just call these 12 people liars? Why didn't they just come right out and say that they were putting out lies? I'll tell you why. It's because they knew very well that by calling someone a liar or spreading lies with the intent to deceive and harm others was overtly defamatory. Using disinformation and switching it up with the word misinformation, many people at that time in 2021 really didn't know the difference. But CCDH knew the difference, and that's all that matters, because here you have on record Imran Ahmed showing us that he fully understands. There's no mix-up or misunderstanding. He fully understands the difference between the two words and their definitions, and it was a conscious choice to use disinformation while painting these 12 innocent people as the most horrible people on the planet and should be exiled from the online space as well as the rest of society. So it wasn't enough that they were asking the public to recommend or report or tell these social media platforms to deplatform and demonetize these people. No, they took it a step further. It wasn't enough to just silence and ostracize these 12 people from any online space, but they also wanted these platforms to deplatform any organization that had involvement with these people, regardless if they supported their stance on whatever content that they were putting out there. This was the most diabolical time in our history. This is what happened to us within the Megxit community. Like, you couldn't talk about Yankee Wally, otherwise you got deplatformed because they deplatformed her. And we saw this same pattern, the same behavior, and the same abuse these 12 innocent people had endured, but on a smaller scale. We didn't have the President of the United States calling attention to it from a global standpoint, but we still suffered. There were many of us who lost income, who were isolated and ostracized. I mean, it really was traumatic. And even talking about it now and reviewing the suffering that these 12 had gone through, it's the exact same thing. And it's still going on, but it's being done in a covert way. Imran Ahmed needs to be brought to justice, along with Prince Harry and the rest of these scumbags who violated our civil rights, our God-given rights. If you want to learn more about this disinformation dozen and how it affected these 12 people, definitely go and follow Sergi. Currently, right now, a group of them are currently suing Imran Ahmed for defamation, and rightfully so. And I hope that justice does prevail in that case, because there's without a doubt the harm that was caused onto these people intentionally, like in itself alone, calling them disinformation dozen was deliberate and a choice, and knew the harm that it was going to bring onto them. And the intent of doing it was to make them suffer so they'd learn a lesson and teach everybody else as the example not to go against the narrative, not to dissent, not to voice your opinions. Otherwise, this could happen to you. And to me, I think that's incredibly evil, and something needs to be done. But that's just my 2 cents. Anyhow, what do you guys think? Justice is going to happen. It's just more people need to be aware. And the Justice Department needs to do something about it, because these people clearly have not stopped. It's just under a different disguise called online child safety. I think this is a good place to stop. I will be back tomorrow with part 2, discussing Imran Ahmed's past and history and how they conflict with what he told the House committee in that interview. It should be fun. Anyhow, definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.